see what's Galilee physically like. Even in this day and age, that part of the world, what is it like? And so it was the most northernmost part of Israel. And so the climate was a little bit cooler. It was mountainous. There was very fertile soil. And the beautiful Sea of Galilee was a major natural resource there that we see all throughout the Bible. And Jesus, throughout the Bible, actually is seen speaking about Galilee very highly. He had a love for this place, and I wouldn't say it's too far to say that he had a special kind of love for Galilee, because that's where he was from. Jesus actually established his identity in Galilee, the Jesus we know. Most of the revolution that started with following Jesus began in Galilee. It was the first place he was recognized as a prophet, as a child. Galilee is the first place where he gained a following, because it's said in the Bible that people in Galilee realized he spoke with an authority from God, unlike the Pharisees of the Sanhedrin at the time, who spoke with, just an authoritarian rule. Galilee was the first place Jesus actually performed his first miracle, at the wedding in Cana, where he turned water to wine. And I believe that Jesus loved Galilee. And it's said throughout the Bible multiple times that he always loved to return there. And I think many of us can relate with our own homelands, especially where we spent our childhood, which Jesus spent his childhood in Galilee. Our childhood is what we think back to when we think of good memories, where we overcame bad memories. For Jesus specifically, throughout the Bible, he constantly remembers and loves the memories of when he prayed alone in Galilee and its beautiful nature. And the question to a lot of theologians was, why would Jesus return to Galilee in his limited time back here on earth? It was kind of a place that wasn't on the map of, big population centers where Jesus could have appeared and gained more of a following. And the answer that I came across a few times, and it's the perspective that I chose to believe, was that Jesus really just wanted to come back to his homeland one more time to say goodbye to it, because he loved it. And as I was reading this sermon and preparing it, Jesus' love for Galilee reminded me a bit of myself. Ever since I was a kid, and if anybody knows me, they know that I love Ukraine. I think being a naive child, I always thought it was the best country in the world. I didn't see any problems, but I always had a deep sense of pride and love for my country. And I think a lot of people in our youth could relate and feel the same way. I remember the good memories of watching Ukraine's soccer team play, watching Klitschko beat everybody up. I remember the sad memories. A lot of times my parents read me and my family stories about Holodomor, where oftentimes we were all in tears by the end of it. And I remember Teta Olya and Dядько Andriy. Those are my Ukrainian school teachers. I think Max, Alina, and my brother especially remember them, because as much as we hated it now, I'd do anything to go back to one of those classes. And it's the reason I can speak Ukrainian today. And all of this love I have for my country is kind of unexplainable. All the time that I've ever spent in Ukraine was 2 weeks, and it was during a blizzard in April, and it was miserable. And therefore, I now see, with the events unfolding there, that this was a love given to me from God. And I believe that it's a love that's instilled in a lot of us that can come through now when we have to be empathetic to what's happening to our country. I hope that everybody can relate to me in experiencing this kind of love for where they grew up in their childhood. And believe me, I love North Carolina very much. I love this state. And it's where I spent my childhood, and it has my heart too. But as I was writing this sermon, I remembered my brother Tim's sermon 2 weeks ago when he spoke on the topic of neutrality among Christians. And a popular idea that I've been hearing, especially in the Christian community recently, is that as Christians, our homeland, our identity is in heaven. And technically, we shouldn't have a national identity here on earth. And throughout this passage, I truly believe that Jesus exemplified his love for his nation, his God-given nation. And on that idea, it brings me to my next topic, which further on in that story, after establishing the time and place, we see that the disciples, after losing Jesus, had returned to their old hobbies. They went back to fishing. And fishing was a lot different then than we know it today. Fishing was brutal. It's either you oar through usually not calm waters in the Sea of Galilee. It wasn't very calm there. And the people that are actually fishing are dragging this heavy soak net overboard over and over again, oftentimes not catching anything. And if you don't catch anything in that time of day, you went hungry. And for anybody that knows me here, or if you don't, another hobby I have is fishing. I'd say I do a lot of fishing, and I love it. But the people I go fishing with, they have a little bit of a different idea of fishing than I do. For me, there's a point where I realize that we won't catch anything. It's about 3 hours in. My brother and my dad, from that point, about 7 hours more, they'll try, while I'm already giving up. And it's brutal. And I can attest that when you don't catch anything, nothing ruins a mood more. And the one thing I'm thankful for is that for us, we can at least stop by Chick-fil-A after. For the disciples here, in this picture, we see that they had spent all this night fishing, and they were going to be hungry. And I'd imagine that they were very discouraged from that. But something that I can definitely attest to is that the disciples were not happy right now. This was very soon after they had lost their teacher, and a lot of them were still mourning, and a lot of them were very sad about how they had acted when Jesus was being taken to the resurrection on the cross. A lot of them, he had already appeared to them since, but this all-important meeting was the first, most in-detail meeting Jesus had with his disciples on his time back here on earth. And as we see here, if the Bible tells us anything about fishing, it's that if an unknown person tells you to do something, you listen to them and you don't ask any questions, because here again we see that Jesus does a full miracle and gives these disciples, the best catch of their life. And something interesting I found about this story, it's not too important to it, is that a lot of us assume that the disciples figured out that it was Jesus once the miracle had already happened, once they were already at shore. But some questions I had, and some questions that people argue, is that some of the disciples already knew. We know that this miracle had already been done before, and obviously word had gotten around about it. And I wonder if maybe some of them even recognized Jesus' voice from the boat, and that's why they had such a strong faith in what they did. And so this story, at this point, isn't very happy. The disciples were miserable. They had just lost the person that they loved most, and they weren't catching any fish, which is terrible. But it goes on to paint a beautiful picture, as I can imagine the excitement of these disciples as they pull in 153 big fish. The Bible gives us a clear number of how much they caught. And after a night of sadness, I bet that was just amplified. Meanwhile, they're slowly starting to realize that they're going to be reunited with the person that they love, the leader who they had all followed for many years and missed so dearly. And we see that Simon Peter, the student whom Jesus loved most in his time here on earth, jumps into the water fully clothed, just out of excitement, and can't wait to see Jesus again. And one thing I'd like to note about Simon Peter jumping into that water is that Simon Peter was the one that betrayed Jesus 3 times the night that he was taken to be resurrected. And what's cool about this miracle here in the Bible is I feel like it's still very evident today. It reminds me of my favorite verse in the Bible, which is Matthew chapter 19, verse 26. With men this is impossible, but with God all things are possible. And I think a lot of us can learn a lesson here, or have already experienced, when maybe they're overwhelmed with school or work, but as they call out to God, he just makes everything so much easier, and everything turns out well for you. And if you haven't had that experience, we can learn from the disciples here who had faith. After a night of not catching anything, what's casting the net one more time going to help you with? You just aren't going to catch anything. But they chose to have faith. And following this instruction paid off. And I encourage us to have this kind of blind faith for our God and the way he works, to not try to figure out or tell him how we want God's aid in our lives, but to just trust him and accept it when it does come. And another part of this story I really liked, I just love this story completely, is that as the disciples reach shore, they see that Jesus is getting this breakfast ready for them. There's a warm fire, and I'd imagine they were cold, and he has some bread on there, he has some fish, and he tells them to bring more fish so that they can all have breakfast together. And I can't imagine how delicious that meal must have been, considering how hungry the disciples were. Just recently, a few guys from our youth went camping, and it turns out we're horrible cooks. We burned almost everything. And just being hungry, just being outside, everything was delicious to me, which I probably wouldn't even eat it on a regular day. And I think a lot of people here can agree with me that some of the best meals you've had have probably been outside, maybe in a park or a picnic with your family or the people you love. It makes for a very special type of dinner. But one thing that's interesting about this breakfast is that it's not a happy ending just after they reunite with Jesus. I'd imagine that it got very awkward after the initial excitement of them all meeting each other again. Each one of them had shied away from even knowing Jesus when it was most important. And I'd imagine it's very awkward for Jesus too, as, these were the people that loved him so much. And we noticed that Simon Peter, the one that had betrayed Jesus 3 times, and it wasn't just saying that he wasn't affiliated with Jesus. He said he never knew this man. The disciple that was closest to Jesus said he didn't even know this man 3 times, fulfilling Jesus' prophecy. And what's interesting here is that Jesus gives Simon Peter 3 chances to say that he loves him again. And I promise every single person here that at some point in your life, you might have already felt betrayal. I personally have felt the condemnation of when I spoke against somebody that I shouldn't have, or when I didn't speak up when I should have for somebody that I had respect for. And I know in those moments, that could be the furthest that you ever feel from God. And I know that the only person that can clear your conscience after a betrayal like that and forgive you is God. And it's exemplified here at the end of this breakfast. Jesus refers to the most guilty person, Simon Peter. And I want everybody to ask themselves, what would you do if you were in Jesus' shoes? When I was considering this question, knowing my heart, I'd have a problem keeping that conversation calm, meeting with Simon Peter again. And very much less would I find any place in my heart to forgive him. And instead, Jesus does give him this chance to redeem himself. And he does it 3 times. For each time that Simon shied away from Jesus, Jesus gave him another chance to say he loves him. And Jesus didn't need any proof. He knew that this was sitting heavy on Simon Peter's heart. And he didn't want to make it worse or get revenge on him. He just wanted an apology, and he accepted it fully without any other proof. And this is a very beautiful moment because it's an unhumanly forgiveness. It's supernatural. Only God can give it to us. And I want everybody to realize today that the extent of this forgiveness was offered to all of us by what Jesus did on the cross. And no matter how far away you might feel from God, I promise you that Simon Peter was further, but Jesus still gave him mercy, and he still had very big plans for him. We see that Peter went on to do very big things in God's church, and he actually was crucified in a very noble way. He didn't want to be crucified the same way as Jesus. Instead, he did it upside down because of his love for Jesus. We see that his life was it revolved completely from the moment he shied away. And that's a mercy that Jesus has extended for all of us. And that's something we should especially remember on Easter. Something I realized about myself about this holiday of Easter is that I never fully appreciated its worth. It always just had a way of coming up on me. I'd be like, when's spring break? Oh, maybe Easter's before or after that. And compared to Christmas, where everybody's counting down the days months ahead of time, Easter just kind of seemed like a less important holiday. And as I was doing my research for this sermon, I learned that the most popular holiday in Ukraine is Easter. There's a lot of traditions from the Orthodox Church and even Protestant churches that I never even knew of that the Orthodox people observe in Ukraine during this time of Easter, making it the most important holiday there. And it really broke my heart to think of what Easter is like there right now, as we see that there's an absolute genocide going on for the price of Ukraine's freedom. This year, I want to encourage everybody to fully take in the meaning and the worth of this Easter and to consider what Jesus did for all of us on that cross and in that grave. I'm still in high school, and all week I've been hearing the preparations of how my friends and counterparts are planning to spend this Easter break. And I promise everybody that it has nothing to do with remembering what Jesus did on that cross. And it broke my heart to hear those preparations, as I bet that in Ukraine right now, anybody would be willing to have the peace that we have over our heads right now, just for this Easter day, just so that they can observe this all-important holiday. And this Easter, I want to encourage everybody to forget about the little things and the little disputes that we might have had, and to find the thankfulness in your hearts for the bigger picture, for this church that we have, for the mercy that Jesus has given us, and most importantly, for the sacrifice that Jesus made on the cross for us 2,000 years ago. That's pretty much my sermon for you guys today, and as we pray, I want to ask that we cry out to God in short prayers, and I can finish when we're done. And I'd ask everybody to stand up and say amen to this verse, because Jesus' mercy is great. Амінь. Амінь. Боже, я дякую Тобі за цей пасхальний день, Боже. Я дякую за те, що ми могли зібратися сьогодні в церкві, Боже, і сповнити те, що Ти для нас зробив на хресті. Боже, я дякую за цю милость, Боже, я дякую, що Ти простив провини наші, Боже. І я особливо молюся сьогодні за Україну, Боже, за всі місця, Боже, що зараз під огнем, Боже, за Маріуполь, за Херсон, за Харків, за Київ, Боже. Охорони всі ці місця, Боже, де ця війна є, Боже. Я молюся за цих людей, Боже. Тільки в Тобі є перемога, Боже. Дякую, що Ти нам прощаєш, Боже. Я прошу за Україну, Боже. Прости наші провини, Боже. Я прошу, щоб Ти вернув мир, Боже, і охранив нашу країну. Дякую Тобі за все. Амінь.
Как Давидик уже сказал, наша душа сейчас разделена как бы на две части. Одна часть радуется, что Христос воскрес, а мы празднуем Его величие и воскресение. А вторая часть нашей души, мы горюем, мы печалимся и страдаем за наш народ, за наших родных, которые сейчас в Украине. Я давно ничего не писала, то времени, то настроения не было. Ну как-то Господь послал мне вот 2 недели назад, положил на сердце эти слова, эту мелодию, что все в Его руке. Если мы просите, дано будет нам. И Господь через свою милость, Он знает все, что будет впереди, все в Его руках. И я знаю, что Господь воскресит нашу страну. Choir, please on stage.